1857, the people of Millbrook, Georgia, thought they had buried Samuel Harwick for good. The town blacksmith had died suddenly one October morning, found cold in his workshop with no marks on his body and no explanation for his death. But 3 days after his funeral, something impossible happened. Samuel's voice began echoing from his grave at Millbrook Cemetery, speaking words that would drive the entire town to madness. What the townspeople heard from beneath 6 feet of Georgia soil wasn't just the ramblings of a dead man. It was a warning about something far worse than death itself. The story begins with Samuel Harwick, a man who had spent 37 years working metal in his forge on the outskirts of Millbrook. Samuel was known for 2 things: his skill with iron and his complete silence about his past. He had arrived in town 15 years earlier with nothing but the clothes on his back and enough money to buy his workshop. No one knew where he came from, and Samuel never spoke of family or friends from before. On October 15, 1857, Samuel's apprentice, Thomas Mills, arrived at the workshop to find his master lying motionless beside the cold forge. The doctor, Benjamin Hayes, examined the body and found nothing wrong. No disease, no injury, no poison in his system. Samuel Harwick appeared to have simply stopped living. The funeral took place 3 days later at Millbrook Cemetery. Reverend Jonathan Clark delivered a brief service for the mysterious blacksmith. The entire town attended, not out of love for Samuel, but out of curiosity about the man who had lived among them like a ghost for 15 years. They lowered his pine coffin into the red Georgia clay and covered it with dirt. Everyone went home believing that was the end of Samuel Harwick's story. They were wrong. The first voice from the grave came at sunset on October 19th. Margaret Wilson, a widow who lived near the cemetery, heard what sounded like a man calling for help. She thought someone had fallen into an open grave and rushed to investigate. But when she reached the cemetery, she found all the graves undisturbed. The voice was coming from beneath Samuel's fresh burial mound. "The chains," the voice said, clear as if Samuel were standing right beside her. "They're breaking the chains." Margaret ran screaming back to town. The sheriff, Robert Hayes, thought the woman had imagined the whole thing. Grief and loneliness could play tricks on a person's mind, especially around graveyards at sunset. But the next evening, 3 more people heard the voice, then 7 more the night after that. By October 22nd, half the town was gathering at the cemetery each evening, waiting for Samuel's voice to speak from his grave. What they heard chilled them to their bones. Samuel wasn't asking for help or crying out in pain. He was delivering warnings about something he called the bound ones. "They've been sleeping beneath Millbrook for 200 years, Samuel's voice explained one night. "But the binding is weakening. Someone must renew the seal before the new moon, or they'll break free." The townspeople had no idea what Samuel meant by the bound ones, or what kind of seal needed renewing. Millbrook had been settled for only 40 years. What could have been sleeping beneath their town for 2 centuries? Reverend Clark began searching through old church records and county documents, looking for any mention of unusual events or rituals in the area. What he found in a water-damaged ledger from the 1600s made his blood run cold. Before Millbrook existed, before Georgia was even a state, Creek Indian shamans had used the area as a prison, not for criminals or enemies, but for something much worse. The ledger, written by a Spanish missionary, described creatures that fed on human fear and despair. The Creek had managed to trap 7 of these entities beneath the earth using ancient rituals and sacred metals. The missionary's account was incomplete, with many pages too damaged to read. But one detail remained clear. The prison required renewal every 50 years, and the ritual demanded someone willing to serve as a guardian between the worlds of the living and the dead. Now, if you're enjoying this story of supernatural terror, make sure to subscribe, because we have dozens more haunting tales that will keep you awake at night. As Reverend Clark shared his discovery with the town, Samuel's nightly messages became more urgent. The dead blacksmith explained that he had been chosen as the new guardian 50 years ago, but something had gone wrong with the ritual. Instead of binding him to the prison while he lived, it had bound his soul after death. "I can feel them stirring," Samuel's voice echoed from the grave. "The iron bonds are rusting. The sacred symbols are fading. You have 4 days until the new moon." The townspeople were faced with an impossible choice. They could dismiss Samuel's warnings as the ravings of a disturbed ghost and risk unleashing something terrible on their community. Or they could believe the word of a dead man and attempt a ritual they barely understood. Thomas Mills, Samuel's former apprentice, made the decision for everyone. He had worked alongside the blacksmith for 3 years and noticed things others had missed. Samuel's metalwork wasn't ordinary. The horseshoes he forged never wore out. The tools he made never broke or rusted. And sometimes, late at night, Thomas had seen his master working on strange symbols and metal shapes that served no purpose he could understand. Samuel was preparing for this, Thomas told the gathered crowd. He knew this day was coming. Thomas led a group of men to Samuel's workshop and found what they were looking for. Hidden beneath loose floorboards were 7 iron plates, each inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Along with the plates was a leather journal written in Samuel's careful handwriting. The journal revealed the truth about the mysterious blacksmith. Samuel had been born in Salem, Massachusetts, the son of a woman accused of witchcraft during the famous trials. His mother had been executed, but not before teaching her young son about the old ways of binding evil. Samuel had spent his life hunting creatures that most people refused to believe existed. The journal contained detailed instructions for renewing the prison beneath Millbrook. The ritual required 7 participants, 1 for each bound one. Each person had to place an iron plate at specific locations around the town while reciting words in a language none of them recognized. But there was a price. One of the 7 participants would not survive the ritual. The prison demanded a guardian, someone willing to watch over the bound ones until the next renewal. That guardian would die at the moment the binding was complete, their soul joining Samuel's in eternal vigilance. On October 25th, the night before the new moon, 7 volunteers gathered at the cemetery. Thomas Mills, Reverend Clark, Sheriff Hayes, Dr. Hayes, Margaret Wilson, and 2 other townspeople whose names history has forgotten. Each carried one of Samuel's iron plates and a copy of the ritual words. As they spread out across Millbrook to perform the binding, Samuel's voice guided them from his grave. He told them where to place each plate, when to speak the ancient words, and how to focus their will on keeping the bound ones trapped. At the stroke of midnight, as the new moon rose invisible in the dark sky, the ritual reached its climax. The 7 participants felt a tremor run through the earth beneath their feet. The air grew thick and hard to breathe. And from 7 different locations around town came the sound of something screaming in rage and frustration. The binding was working. But as the screams faded, one of the 7 collapsed. Thomas Mills, the young apprentice who had discovered Samuel's secret, gasped once and lay still. His soul had been claimed as the new guardian. Samuel's voice spoke from the grave one final time. "It is done. The bound ones sleep for another 50 years. But remember this, people of Millbrook. In 1907, someone must take up the watch again. The prison must not be forgotten." The townspeople buried Thomas Mills beside his former master. Samuel's grave fell silent, and life in Millbrook returned to normal. The iron plates were hidden away, and the journal was locked in the church vault. Years passed. The people who had participated in the ritual grew old and died. New families moved to Millbrook, and the story of the bound ones became just another local legend that no one really believed. In 1907, exactly 50 years later, strange things began happening in Millbrook again. People reported hearing whispers in the wind and seeing shadows move without anyone to cast them. The temperature in certain parts of town dropped without explanation. Animals refused to walk on specific patches of ground. But by then, no one remembered Samuel Harwick or Thomas Mills. The iron plates had been lost. The journal had been forgotten. And when voices began speaking from 2 graves in the cemetery, warning about chains breaking and seals failing, The new residents of Millbrook dismissed them as tricks of the wind. The bound ones stirred in their ancient prison, and this time there was no one left who knew how to renew their chains. Historical records show that between 1908 and 1910, 17 people disappeared from Millbrook under mysterious circumstances. The town was eventually abandoned, and today, nothing remains but foundations overgrown with Georgia pine. But sometimes, hikers in the area report hearing voices calling from beneath the earth, speaking words in a language that makes their blood run cold. And if you know where to look in the Millbrook Cemetery, you can still find two graves side by side: Samuel Harwick and Thomas Mills, the guardians who failed to pass on their terrible knowledge. Local authorities have sealed off the cemetery, claiming the ground is unstable. But the real reason might be something far more disturbing. Because according to the few remaining records from 1910, something finally broke free from its prison beneath the abandoned town. And it's still out there, somewhere in the Georgia wilderness, waiting for the right moment to